Good morning, Mr. Mamet, and thank you so much for the time you decide to dedicate to us today. And I would like to start with the first question. We learned that the story of the Penitent is inspired by the Tarasov case, which is a news story, a real story. So, what impressed you about what you read, and why you decide to tell this story?
Well, you know, it occurs to me that a lot of the questions that you have or that journalists have are the same questions that I have when we ask an artist why. But really, they aren't questions, but they're observations because there isn't any answer. So that you would I would observe to Mark Rothko, for example, why did you decide to concentrate on a painting that was basically red and orange? But there isn't any answer to that question. It looked like a good idea to him. So what I'm really doing is observing something that so moved me that I want more information about it, but there isn't any more information. So why, or differently, why does any of us decide to do anything? What inspired you to wear that yellow dress today, coat, rather than another one, right? You don't know, but it was obvious to you at the time, wasn't it? That was the dress to wear.
A very long collaboration linked you since many years with Luca Barbareschi. How everything started and why you like to work with him.
Well, I'm interested in working with him because he's interested in working with me, and that's the best thing that can happen to a writer, especially a dramatic writer, because you need to be able to put on your plays, right? You could write a novel and put it in the drawer, and maybe someday somebody will like it. But if you're a dramatic writer, you need somebody with a theater. So if I don't have my own theater at the moment, or over the years, sometimes I did. Luca, I met Luca 40, 45 years ago, and he said, I love your stuff. Let me do it. I'll do anything you write. Well, that's the best thing that a dramatist can hear. I mean, I say, thank you. And he has over the years, he's completely supported my work and new work and the restaging of old work. It's an incredible compliment because in Hollywood, they say, you know what? It's just you and me, right? You and me, we're together. It's you and me. But you turn around, it's just you. So once in a while, you meet someone who says, I'm with you, whatever happens, which is uh, it's a reiteration of the old theater troupe. Because the old theater troupe was a bunch of people who threw their lives in together. And right, and it was like, we know that communism can work, but it can't work with a group larger than 12 people. And that's kind of the outside limit. We say we're going to pool our resources and we're going to live or die together. Okay, so that's the way that even when I was a kid, that the old theater companies worked, and that's the way I think Luca grew up, right? So we're going to throw our things together, and we're going to rise or fall together. We're in it together, right? So in the theater, the worst thing that you can do is to sell out your colleagues.
Luca Barbareschi often says that you are a genius between Mozart and Tchaikovsky. Uh, because the quality and the musicality of your words of your text. So, how do you work on dialogues, which are the core of your artistic expression?
I don't work on them, I just write them. And so here's an example I think may explain it. If you look at uh, Mozart's fugues, for example, I don't mean to compare myself to Mozart, but I'm a musician, so I understand what's happening. If you look at Mozart's fugues, he didn't work on them, he improvised them, and then he transcribed what he improvised. It's very, very clear that the stuff is so far beyond anybody's ability to sit down and figure it out. And he may have corrected that or this or that note or got a different idea or used one variation to proceed to another, but he didn't work on them. He just wrote them.
Other topics worthy of reflection in this movie are the cancel culture, the politically correctness, and the censorship. Do you think they are killing the creativity in these days?
Well, I don't think they're really killing. I think they've killed it. But things change. Oliver Cromwell came in to power. He cut off Charles I's head. He closed the theater for 10 years, and then the theater came back stronger than ever. Um, th- that happens. It happens in fascist regimes and happens in communist regimes, and it happens periodically because the culture changes. So the question is, when does the culture come back? And the answer is it never comes back because as Heraclitus said, time is a river flowing through the universe. You can't step into the same river twice. But something else is happening. I mean, for example, the very fact that we're talking is a counter eddy in the flow of that river. Um, Stalin, remember Stalin, right? Joe Stalin, hell of a guy, sloppy kisser, but he was a hell of a guy. And he decided at some point when the Soviets took power, the Bolsheviks took power, they exercised such control over artistic output that nobody could do anything that had a meaning other than supporting communism, right? Everything had to be me and my tractor, or Soviet realism, or and quiet flows the Don, and so forth. Because if things didn't serve the cause of communism, they were pointless. They were, according to those communists, they were mechanistic and they were destructive. And so that's a bad, bad use of art. And so the people who didn't go along got killed. And a lot of the people who did go along started doing trash, for example, especially in the theater, because anything that had a theme that was other than the Soviet people above all was not done. So directors started doing constructivist art on the stage, right? And modern art and putting people in weird masks and making weird sounds so that in effect, so that just like any modern art's garbage, right? Almost anything which is called modern art is garbage. Something is art or it's not. So if people are doing modern art, they can't be criticized, right? Because it doesn't mean anything. So there's one of the great directors was a student of Stanislavski, and he played in Chekhov's early plays. His name was Meyerhold, and he was doing all this Meyerhold theater in Moscow and modern art, and people dressed up as parrots and people dressed up as teapots and so forth, and big colors and Leon Bakst. But then Stalin decides, you know what? I think there's some content in there. What are you trying to say about communism? So he took Meyerhold and he tortured him to death. So there we are. So that's the end of the progression, which we're in now. Is it going to progress that far? Perhaps yes and perhaps no, but that's the end of that progression. Because you gotta be more a Catholic than the Pope. If you're in a time of repression, you better be more Catholic than the Pope. But if you are more Catholic than the Pope, Stalin might turn around and say, "Hold on a second, you ain't the Pope, I'm the Pope," and torture Meyerhold to death.
So, how do you work with Luca Barbareschi before shooting? Do you have many conversation with him? How it works?
Well, they don't have conversations. I give them the screenplay. I wrote a screenplay of that play, and I said, "What do you think?" I said, "You got any questions?" He said, "No." I said, "Great. See you at the opening." Well, it is because if the questions aren't answered in the screenplay, by the screenplay's no good. It's like it's a recipe, right? If you have the recipe, it's like 2 pounds of cut shallots, one fresh, 2 pounds of veal, da 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 da. You don't want the cook to say, "Now what should the veal look like?" Right? It's in the recipe. It's veal. Follow the recipe, you'll end up with Milanese, God willing. I thought he made a wonderful choice. I thought the acting was superb. Yeah, but more than that, right? People, they this ludicrous. Basically, it's a heresy in the theater where after the theater in the United States, the audience gets to sit down and the actors and the director come out and they talk about things like this, right? Why did you do? Why did you do that? Legitimate questions, but there aren't any answers. So the people ask them in the audience because they still want to be connected, and the actors and director answer them because they're flattered, but there isn't any more connection. When the curtain goes down, they're done. They have nothing to say to each other. Do you ever come up to a very famous person and start to babble? I have. Like, oh, look, oh, do you know who you are? You got nothing to say. Do you think you do? But all that they can do to you is be polite until you go away.
Society driven by lies and bitterness, and often unpleasant characters are the very often explored by your movies and by your plays. Can you elaborate on it?
Well, sure. I mean, it's human nature, right? Societies don't differ. We all go through cycles, but they don't differ, right? There's greed, lust, courage, commitment, gratitude, envy. These are all part of human nature. They don't go away. They show up in different mixtures at different times, both in ourselves and in our organizations and in the governments that either we elect or who usurp power. But that's the human condition. So if drama is not talking about the human condition, we might as well watch Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse. You know, what are we talking about?
So another strong topic of the Penitent is the Carlos relation, the protagonist's relation with the Jewish faith and with God. And so the movie talks about the way you can read and use the God's word in the word. Can you tell us something about it?
Well, the world has decided lately that it's time to kill the Jews again. So as a Jew, of course, I've taken notice of that. So that would be in my consciousness, right? It was like telling Elie Wiesel, right? He wrote all those things about being in the concentration in Auschwitz, right? You say, now what caused you to write that book, Elie, about being in Auschwitz? Was there something important about that inspired you? So any Jew who's paying attention knows that anti-Semitism has been part of the Western world since before the Christian era, and it that's what the Old Testament's about. And it's saying, guess what? Get used to it. You want to be Jewish or not? And the answer has always been for the Jew, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. Sometimes it just gets too fucking hard. So that's the answer of everybody in the Old Testament. Curiously, it's also the answer of Jesus, right? Who was, of course, a Jew. And, right, so in Gethsemane, he says, you know what? It's not about Jewish, but it's about being a child of God. He says, I'm just not sure I can take it, right? And he has to make that decision, just like Moses has to make the decision. Moses doesn't want to go back to Egypt. He's having a good time. He's a shepherd. He says, leave me alone, right? But every once in a while, the hand of God, whether that's for the Jews or whether that's for the Christians or whether that's for many of us in our daily lives, comes and says, okay, but guess what? You have a conscience. I know you say you don't, or you say that your conscience is just doing good, right? But if you think about it, your conscience says, that's just self absorption because you don't know what's good. The human being doesn't know what's good unless we can refer to certain existing norms. For example, the Gospels, or for example, the Old Testament, right? And say, I get it. I don't know God. I don't know what's good. You know what's good. If I do these things, I'm going to be cool. But if I say, no, 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 I'm going to put all that aside. Religion is nonsense. The Constitution is nonsense. Civilization is nonsense. I'm going to do what's good. Well, we've just become the devil. So that's I guess one of the underlying themes in the movie is that this guy who says, no, no, I've made the correct choice, it turns out he was shucking too, right? Interesting.
What kind of feelings you would like to provoke in the audience with this movie?
I'd like the people to have a good time. I'd like the people to say, yeah, I got what I paid for. whether that's a laugh or a gasp, or even to put our human burdens down for a couple of hours and listen to a story. Because what we're doing is stories around the campfire, no different than the cave people, right? We're going to take an hour after the sun goes down, after we've eaten our meal, before we go to bed, and the fire is burning down, and we don't want to think about all the bad beasts out there who might eat us, and we don't want to think about whether the crop's going to come in, or whether the Visigoths are going to show up, or whether the Phoenicians are going to raise, or why our stupid fucking children won't listen to a word I say. No, no, no. We want to hear a bedtime story, right? And so that's what I'm doing. And that's what the theater and film are doing. They're telling people bedtime stories before they go to sleep to still their mind. But listen, I'd also like to thank Italy for not only for Luca, right, and not only for Vittorio De Sica, and not only for Stefania Sandrelli, but for the Negroni. They're all genius, right? Right? Luca, right? De Sica, okay. Um, and the Negroni, I mean, what is it? It's just Campari and it's gin and it's dry vermouth. And it's magnificent. So what's the Campari doing? What's the message of the Campari and in the Negroni after you drink the Negroni, right? You don't say to the bartender, "My God, this is a spectacular mixture of these three ingredients. Where's the history of them? Where does Campari come from? And what is the Amer Picon?" No, you say, "Hey, that's a good drink." So that's kind of what I like people to think about my films.